Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin, and today I want to tell you about my very first quilt. My very first quilt I made almost exclusively with men's dress shirts from the thrift store. And you might wonder how I did that. I had been kind of collecting men's dress shirts from the thrift store as I found ones that I liked the way they felt, or I liked the color, or I liked the pattern. I had made a crocheted blanket for my husband, and I was talking to a friend who is a quilter. She's forgotten more about quilting than I've ever known. And I made the statement that I need to make something for myself because I always make things for everybody else and give them away almost as soon as I make them. And she said, well, what do you want? And I said, I really want a soft, comforting quilt that just doesn't require anything of me. and she said, oh, you should do a low volume quilt. And I was like, what is that? So of course, then we had to talk about that, which I won't go into that right now because we'll be here forever because I have a lot to say about low volumes. But I had men's dress shirts on hand, and some of them I had broken down into fabric. Some of them were sitting around waiting on me to do that. So while I finished my husband's crochet blanket, I started breaking down shirts. Didn't know anything about quilting at all. I had sewed before. I had known my way around a sewing machine, but I just didn't even know. So I watched YouTube videos like this one, and several of them, and I went to my library and found a book called Sunday Morning Quilts, and looked through the book and found a pattern that I really liked. And they call this, the ladies that wrote the book call this pattern Splash. And I thought, I can do that. And so I just pulled out all my white and blue men's dress shirts and started cutting. And that particular book, Sunday Morning Quilts, I recommend it to you highly, especially if you're new to quilting. It has all the how-tos. It has all of the great, how to do binding and why you make the choices that you make. But it's a scrap quilting book, and men's dress shirts are especially great for scrap quilts because it's not big, huge pieces of yardage. There's a lot of fabric there, but some of it comes from sleeves and some of it comes from collars. And so I put it together. So I'm going to show you my quilt, and then we can talk about it, or I'll talk about it a little bit more. You're not talking about it. Maybe you're talking about it to your friends. I don't know. But here's the quilt. So it is predominantly blue men's shirts. There are some whites and there are some grays. The center section is really the only part that's not all men's fabrics. I called my sister up and said, do you have any scrap fabric in yellow? And she said, yes, I do. I'll bring it over. So this yellow gingham with the lollipop was actually from my youngest child's bedding, baby bedding, crib bedding that I made for her. And I just liked it. And then the top two were from my sister. And then these remaining 4 are men's dress shirts. So the way this kind of quilt is put together, it is a scrap quilt. And so it's basically made with long strips of fabric. So you make a kind of a block out of those strips, and then you make another block, and then you make another block, and then you just sew all the blocks together. Which is, if that's not a quilt, that's kind of like the definition of a quilt. But I did not know what I was doing. I called my quilter friend 1,000,000 times, texted her at all hours of day and night, and wore her out. She loved every minute of it. And so I put it together, and then I just pieced together. So like I would do a dark, and then I would think, oh gosh, I need something that's got a little something else in it. So I would put a blue that had some yellow. And then there were certain of the whites that I liked so much that I used a lot. And then when it was all said and done, and I showed my sister, she said, it looks like sunshine and a blue sky with clouds. And so I had heard somewhere that you need to name your quilt. So that's the name of this quilt, Sunshine in a Blue Sky with Clouds. But a couple of things that I want to tell you about that are just kind of unique. Well, I guess everybody has a unique story with every single quilt, honestly. So even the binding is a men's dress shirt. And because I didn't know any better, you know, the arrogance of ignorance is really remarkable. I didn't know, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know to be afraid, and I didn't know like how hard it is to do any particular thing. So I just kind of went for it. But I never thought anything about the backing. I just pieced it together just like I pieced the front together. Now that I have been quilting a little bit and I buy yardage for the backing now, because it's so much more uniform and it's so much less work. But I had this idea that what I would do, since I didn't have yards and yards of fabric, that I would just do kind of a version on the back of what I did on the front, which if you're a quilter, I hope you're cringing right now. I mean, you should be cringing. Everyone that is hearing this story should be cringing because it's kind of crazy. But this is the back. And so I took my all of my white men's dress shirts, and I had to go back and buy some more to get this much landscape covered. And I literally made exactly on the back what's on the front, except in mirror, because I wanted to quilt it in such a way that what was quilted on the front would match up on the back. So I don't know if you can see this rectangle right here. This is exactly the same as the yellow rectangle on the front. So this is the front again. And then here's the back. So this piece matches up with the one, or was supposed to match up with the one on the front. And I thought nothing of this. I was like, well, I mean, math, that's the way math works. So I sewed it all together. And then when I went to make the quilt sandwich, which for those of you that don't quilt sandwich is the backing and then the batting and then the quilt top put together and basted with either pins or that's the whole thing, all the different ways you can baste a quilt sandwich. So not for today. I realized that I was going to be basting it blind, putting the quilt sandwich together blind, meaning I was not going to be able to see the back rectangle. And so therefore I was not going to be able to match it up to the front. And that's when I realized just exactly how ignorant I was and just exactly how arrogant I was. And so what I did, I just trusted the math and laid it out and pinned the whole thing and tried to kind of, as it was on my floor, as I'm pinning, I'm kind of like, I think that's pretty close, trying to feel through the batting. And then I started quilting, and I quilted it on my own machine, and I basically just kind of followed the lines of the blocks that are on the front. And because math does work, and because sometimes I think that God just really likes to shine upon those who are courageous or foolish. It lined up like almost perfectly. I think at one place it might be 1/8 of an inch off. So that was super exciting, even though if you looked at this quilting, if you're a quilter and you saw this quilting up close, I would probably actually not show you. I would be embarrassed because it's my first quilt. But that was kind of a miracle and exciting and fun. And what I want to tell you about this quilt before this long rambling story comes to an end is that this is the softest quilt you have ever put your hands on. Now, I did not know at that time that it's really better to work almost exclusively with cotton if you can. So some of these are poly blend, which meant that they really crawled under the machine and they didn't hold a crease well and they kind of puckered in some places. Do you know that feeling in the middle of the night when you wake up and you're kind of hot and you turn your pillow over and it's just cool and smooth and soft? It's like, oh, that's what this whole quilt feels like. Like, I'm such an exaggerator. I'm such a storyteller, but that is the truth. It feels exactly like the other side of the pillow. And so it has ended up being like, what a great gift to myself that my first quilt ended up being so soft and so comforting. It's very light. When I took it to the quilt store, because I had to buy some batting and I didn't know what I was doing. And so you always go to your local quilt store because those ladies and men that work there know so much. It's ridiculous how much they know. The lady in line behind me was watching and she said, "Ooh, that's going to be such a wonderful summer quilt." And she's right. It has become such a wonderful summer quilt. So that's my first quilt, and it's all men's dress shirts from the thrift store. And this one on the back, this is an addendum. Sorry, addendum number 1. The blue fabric with the red plaid, I loved so much. There was something about that fabric that I just loved, and I kept trying to put it on the front of the quilt, and I felt like it was working against me. I just felt like it didn't work with the other blues on the front. It was just too contrasty, I guess. I don't know. I just felt like it fought with me. And so I figured out what I would do. And again, this is just the addendum, is that I just put it all on the back. And then that way I got to use that fabric that I really loved, and it doesn't compete with the yellow on the front. And so, yeah, so that's my very first quilt. And it's like probably 97% men's dress shirts from the thrift store. And that's how I got started. And honestly, that's why I'm sitting here talking to a camera, but I'm talking to you because I think it's fun and I want you to have this experience too. I'm Kathy Martin, and this is the Catbird Quilts. Thanks for watching.